morning, everyone. We welcome you all to our Bible study, and it is being recorded from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent in Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. Today is Saturday, May 13th, 2017, and our moderator is Tom from New York.
Well, hello, this is Tom. Okay, so we'll start out with the quote from Miscellany. The student of this book, meaning Science and Health, which keeps the Scriptures, will tell you that his higher life is the result of his conscientious study of science and health in connection with the Bible.
Thank you.
That's right. That's what I will tell you. But we all should say that this is true of all of us.
Higher life is the result of this study of science and health in connection with the Bible. That's why, for anyone who doesn't know, we should be reading the Science and Health Bible prose works a few pages a day consecutively. We were always taught this. And then when you finish, you start again. They're healers, they're educators, chart of life. They will lead you, as this says, to a higher sense of life. It has to be a conscientious study of it. Anybody else?
So, any other thoughts on this?
I was grateful that it was added in our newsletter that if someone had a problem that they weren't seeing the answer to go back and study science and health, the whole thing, and go back again, and do it again, and go back again, and do it again until the answer came, and to study, not just read.
Thank you. That's Martha Wilcox, and Jim found it and put that in the newsletter.
I think that's an interesting point, because sometimes with our lesson sermon, sort of gets a sense that you read just selected, passages in science and health, and that's all you do. But actually, we should take the time out just to read it. Now, it's not about studying it, but I mean, you can't be studying unless you're starting to read it. So we should be reading outside the lesson sermon.
Yeah, it's a good reason to keep the textbooks in your hand and not just rely solely on the full text. You can do that.
And an interesting way to look at the Bible is, a lot of times it's like we only go to the New Testament because there's a lot of great things to read in there. But just something to think through logically is like when you read the New Testament, how much they refer to the Old Testament. So all of it is good for us. Science and health, the New Testament, the Old Testament, it's all important. Otherwise, in the New Testament, they would have said, just read the New Testament, But they don't.
Jesus referred frequently to the Scriptures. In his days, the Scriptures were the Old Testament.
Right.
And, the Bible's referred to the chart of life. And obviously, science and health, its source of inspiration was the inspired Word of God, which is recorded in the Bible. The whole thing about having a chart is that it points out the way. And it'd be a pretty arrogant sense for anybody to think they didn't need a chart or need something to point the way for them. So the study of the Bible and the published writings of Mary Baker Eddy, to study them as the chart, thing that points out the way.
I think it's the conscientious study, as it says, that leads to the living of it. So.
Thank you.
So we'll go to our first question. Just a Bible fact. But if it makes people think about some concepts in the Bible, that's good too. So, where is Nain?
It's a village of Galilee, about 3 miles southwest of Mount Tabor, and it added another fact, about 25 miles southwest of Capernaum, and it's at the beginning of a great plain below it.
And also the west of the village, it's just a little village, there were tombs, sepulchres, which is where they say Jesus met this woman. Going there.
It's not far from Nazareth, where Jesus grew up.
Thank you, that's right. 6 miles southeast of Nazareth.
Yeah.
Did you ever visit there, Tom?
Oh, I did, and I was using the GPS to find there was a hospital we were staying at. It was like an old Arab mansion in the center of the city, and we kept going into a dead end because the GPS didn't work. So I finally saw a taxi stand and jumped out and hired a taxi. I said, "We just want to follow you."
Oh.
So the streets are very narrow and twisty, and it's just, fascinating place.
Is it still called Nain?
Oh, I talking about Nazareth. I have not been to Nain.
Oh, Nazareth. Oh, okay.
That was Nazareth. Sorry, I thought you said Nazareth. Yes. So that was Nazareth. Yeah.
I read that now it's N-E-I-N is what it's called now.
N-E-I-N.
I read that it's fallen on very difficult days because they depended on one crop, and so now it's a very depressed small town.
Yeah.
I also went to
green
Capernaum, and it's amazing how much is actually there. I didn't know anything about it, and when I went there, there are lots of remnants of old buildings and stuff. Just didn't realize how substantial it was.
Now, this is Capernaum?
Yes, Capernaum.
When I was talking about Nain, I wasn't talking about Capernaum.
Right.
Moving from city to city.
Well, they're all kind of near each other. Nazareth, Nain, Capernaum.
I gather you could see something, you could look towards Samaria.
I understand Nain now is Muslim. There was a church there which was supposedly marked the spot where Jesus did this healing. I'm not sure if that's still there, but anyway, it's interesting.
So this is the area that Jesus walked around in and went from town to town preaching and healing, teaching. I guess he didn't go that far from his home during his mission, right?
No, my understanding is he never went farther than 30 miles from his home. And yet look at what he did and what he accomplished. That's why, I'm not saying against travel, but you can sure accomplish a lot without traveling anywhere. The disciples, of course, went many places farther than that.
I always found that kind of interesting because when I was growing up, people talked about traveling, but it seems different today. Now that it seems like people are obsessed with traveling.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it, but it does seem to feel different. I know one place I lived in a farming community, and there were a number of grandparents that some of my friends had told me about who were born and raised and lived and died in the same county. They never even left the county.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, then you go to another state. They actually stayed in the same county their entire life.
True, and that's also true in little towns in Europe. People have lived and stayed there their whole lifetime. But at one time, around the turn of the century, it was part of your education, perhaps, to go to Europe for a month or things like that. Anyway.
If you could
I
afford
have found that people who are retired, there are a lot of people that I meet or know who, I mean, they feel now that they're retired, they go and they travel all the time. And they travel to far out places all over the world.
Yeah, but just think what they could be doing if they're going with the right motive.
Yes.
Well, I think they're just going to see, and maybe buy things.
Yeah, well,
That's right. But these apostles and disciples, they went with the right motive to spread the gospel. And that's still going on with missionary work.
That's different from the people that just want to find as many places to go to and enjoy as they can.
Absolutely, it is.
check off your bucket list.
Yeah.
And today with the internet, we can spread the gospel without having to travel too much.
Thank God.
Thank God for the website.
God, yes, and
Yeah.
it must be supported with our prayers that it is going out to the far corners of the earth.
Okay. So for question 2, Linda, are you on the line?
Yes.
Oh, do you want to read this question? Since you corrected it.
What is the fifth commandment? Was the question.
It originally said the 6th, but that does not pertain to the lesson. So.
No, that was a misprint.
Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee.
Very quiet.
This is one commandment that I always struggled with because I didn't understand the true meaning of it.
A lot of people struggle with it. Maybe one reason why it's not the most commonly quoted commandment.
You really don't know whether they're talking about your earthly father and mother or God.
Who doesn't know?
I don't know. But when I read this, honor thy father and mother.
It's one of the, if it's maybe the only commandment that tells you what will result from doing this, gives you a good result as they do in the Beatitudes. But I'm sure it has many different interpretations, and that's one of them. One of the commentaries went through all the various forms you could think of mother and father, including, ministers and all kinds of things, sort of those in authority that you were to honor. So let's discuss this. To me, there are two levels of this commandment. One I consider a more human interpretation of it, and I don't think that's a bad interpretation, but it's not the ultimate interpretation.
I would agree with that, that part is important also, because I work with children, and one thing I've seen in the last 15 years is this disobedience towards adults that is very, Ms. Zeddy talks about it in Science and Health, that it blights the buds of, I can't remember what the word was, I was looking for it, but it's very important quality that these children need to have. The basic starting to have a good relationship even with God. They can't be obedient to adults. It's a disrespect and arrogance that they show, and that they feel they don't need to do what you say and almost mock you. And it's all the way down in the age of 5. I mean, it may be younger, but that's the youngest I work with.
This is it. This is a hugely important point for our society, that there is no respect for anything, any kind of authority. I'm saying this very generally. That's not true about, obviously, all people in all places.
But we're seeing it right now in our country. There's no respect.
Yes.
And that, to me, speaks volumes of what Linda's saying. I mean, I experienced it also. There is no respect for authority whatsoever.
You're absolutely right. And in this one commentary, which I'm sure was written a long, long time ago, it talks about governing officials as well. The lack of respect is just unbelievable at this point, or almost anything. And it what does it do to a society when there's no respect? I mean, you see it. Linda sees it in a classroom.
I think it goes both ways. If you're a leader, you need to respect other people. And I'm just saying this from recent examples, because where I work, a lot of times we're on a conference call with someone in another city, and this person acts like they're someone very important. And so I'm sitting there, and because people all put themselves on mute on the phone, and they start saying the most terrible things about him because he's not respecting them, and they're all laughing at him. And it happens like every other day.
Yeah, this is not what we're talking about here.
But this is it is the other side of the coin, though, because if a parent, and this is what Luann was talking about, if your parent or government official or pastor it seems to be not worthy of respect, well,
you got a problem.
Then you got a problem. Yeah. So this is the other side of the coin, and it's absolutely fair to say that.
That's why it's very important to have teachers as children are growing up. I know I looked up to some of my teachers, but you need to have teachers who really command respect and have beautiful qualities.
That's right. And all of this is based, again, on how much of God do these people know and express. This is the failing of the society. You get children who are not taught of God. They're not taught the commandments, the Beatitudes, any rules, and so then they don't teach it to their children, and this total lack of respect gets into play. But another point is, in many ways, Saul did not deserve David's respect, did he?
Oh, but he got it.
No,
he got David's love.
He did. Even though he didn't deserve it.
And what happens when there is no respect and no obedience to the law, whatever the law is? What happens to society?
Chaos. Chaotic. There's no guidance.
That's what's going on now.
Anything goes. Anything goes.
Yeah, the word is anarchy.
Describe this age.
Yeah. And we've never experienced it in this country.
No.
So we don't know how horrible.
Yeah, it's scary.
It's very scary.
Well, it's the same in the home. If there's no respect, no discipline, there's chaos. Everybody wants to do whatever they want. How can that be? So.
There's all this yelling and shouting and carrying on and
anything goes.
Yep. And it's a terrible way to live.
The nature of the human mind to just be so selfish that it is just totally out of control and there can be no unity. But I wanted to say something going back to David's example and Saul.
Thank you.
I'm not so sure that it was respect for Saul, but rather obedience to principle that David acted the way that he did. So he was obeying God by showing whatever respect the person had for the position that they occupied. More out of respect out of the position and out of God than as a person.
And as a result, there was not anarchy.
Yes.
Exactly.
And there would have been.
There would have been otherwise.
Well, that's an interesting point because that takes the personality out of it.
Thank you.
Exactly.
It just makes me think, but that's really important because you're giving respect for the position they hold, and you're not making it personal.
Yes. This is, and
If
this
you
is,
like them or something,
well, that's right. And this is how the commandments ultimately become obeyed. All of them. You have to lift it above personality and people, and realize you are obeying God, and you are obeying His principles and His laws. And perhaps it's not right to be disrespectful, rude, no matter how disrespectful and rude you might be treated. The thing about committing adultery, if you don't commit adultery, because you say, well, you love your wife or your husband, well, say they commit adultery, say they do something terrible to you. So then do you commit adultery or show them? No, you don't do it because there's a principle involved, because it involves God. If you keep that in thought, you're safe. But if you put it down to that human level, you're tossed to and fro, as the Bible also says.
Well, actually, maybe I shouldn't bring this up, but my great-grandfather did that.
Did what?
Oh, well, his wife cheated on him.
Oh,
So
yeah.
then he went and cheated on her.
Right. That's very common.
So that's the blind leading the blind. You both go down. That's
That's exactly right. It is. There's no principle. It's all personality, and it's the Jewish law, which is what do they say?
Eye for an
eye for an eye. Yeah, thank you. An eye for an eye. Yep. Not do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
And the retaliation is evidently part of their accepted norm.
Exactly.
But Jesus came along and said to love your enemies. And Paul clarified it even more. Not to be overcome with evil, but to overcome evil with good.
So this is what gets you out of this human sense of things to a divine sense of the principle. And it's just what Tom says. You take the personality out of it. You do it because it's right. Not because the person is deserving of it, but because it is right. And if you do that, eventually things will get back into focus. If you don't do it, you will get chaos and anarchy. And believe me, the country doesn't have it yet, but some cities are having it. Some of these people who are paid to or go in and cause chaos and disruption, for what? For what purpose? Except for that.
I think a lot of people think they want it, but they don't realize all it would entail. And yesterday I had a car trip, and I was actually thinking a lot of the way, I'm so glad that, everything is in place, our infrastructure is in place, and, God makes it so that all this can happen. And these people are happy to do it.
So true. Because this is what creates the order, the harmony, instead of the chaos. And
Well, this is really helpful for me because, I had parents who did some things that were really terrible. So when you think about this commandment, it's very perplexing as to what you do.
Well, and ultimately, why is it important to train children to be obedient? It's a matter of principle.
They'll have it when they grow up, and it'll continue. Otherwise,
Because obedience to the laws of God is absolutely essential. It's not an option. How do we understand God's laws? By studying? By reading? No.
By obeying.
by living it.
By being obedient. Obedience is a very underappreciated word.
And also, always remember, it's obedience to God in principle, not to the person. You can have a terrible boss, just as Tom described, but he's still your boss. I don't think necessarily mocking him helps. So you have to rise above it. That's why that song, Simply Rise Above It, that they sang last week about the Adam dream. You're obeying God. You're being obedient to Him, not to person. And if it does get so bad, God will show you a way out. Somehow.
If you're obedient to
If
principle.
you're obedient.
David had a horrible king, and yet he obeyed the law, and as a result, he became one of the greatest kings ever.
Abigail had a horrible husband. She did the best she could and was lifted out of that situation and ended up being David's wife. Sure.
And David didn't teach the people that were with him to disrespect the role of king. So when he became king, they respected him.
That's true.
So, I had sort of a contentious relationship with my mother, and I had thought a lot about this when I was younger, and I just realized the only way I couldn't dishonor her was just to not be around her. So I didn't know how else to do it. So.
Well, and you see, for every instance like that, there's probably a different solution. It is very tragic when a child is put into a situation where the parents are drunk or other things, are abusive. So we can certainly pray about that. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that, because I know some of you have been in those situations,
Well,
other than Jeremy.
yeah, and those kind of situations should and do push us closer to God, because that's the only solution. That's the only answer.
I think we've all, I know from my experience is true, known other people who were not blood relatives, but yet have been a very good example of a Christly life. You can look at them and appreciate, maybe even love them as if they were parents, because they were like a guidance into something that's a much higher level. Experience that.
It's true. Usually there's someone or something that will come into your life that will help you, some angel.
That's what happened in my life. Is someone came along that just kind of adopted me. So it helped a lot to get me out of that sense of my own parents, and that there was no way to be obedient to my parents, only through fear. And this other person came along, and I had great respect for her. And it just kind of got me out of that, I would say, that mental downfall that I was in, because I just thought all people were like that. And then this other person comes along and shows me the difference. I had great respect for her.
Thank you, Luann. I know of other instances where it's been a grandparent or something, person, someone. That's why you must always be willing to see how you can help, especially a child. Certainly teachers, as Fairley mentioned. Have a good teacher. Now we have social laws, right? That parents that are that abusive to their child usually
Lose the privilege.
yeah, they come under a law where they lose that privilege if it's exposed. But even that law, I think, is sometimes taken advantage of, where a parent can hardly even discipline a child without being taken to court.
Which probably leads to the trouble that Linda has in the classroom.
Yeah.
No respect. Yeah.
Well, they don't feel like they can do anything to the kid. So.
Yes.
Which, I guess, shows that ultimately there is no human answer to this
Thank
question.
you. That's absolutely right.
Which
Mark?
leads in. I was going to say that leads into my situation because my father, from circumstances of his life, was quite severe, and his wife and kids were just laborers. But I'm so grateful for Christian Science because now I have a better perspective of, and I've been able to put that behind and forgive. Probably not 100%, but to the degree that you don't hate and be angry about that. So that's wonderful.
That's very, very important, too. And that's what so many of you have learned here. Yes, if you've had that kind of a background, then you have to forgive it.
For your own sake.
For your own sake. And you have to know that God was always your father, mother, and He's always been with you, always there. Matter that was the Adam dream. And who knows, how your parents were treated that caused them to treat you in that way.
We've got to break the chain.
Yes, and that's what you said, didn't you, Jim?
Absolutely. I knew I couldn't pass that on to my kids, and I would see my mom, and then I would go home and be angry, and that's what made me realize. So.
And he didn't pass it on to his kids, and even that was before he knew anything of science, and that's why God brought him here, because he had a very pure heart, even after all that it was done to him, as does Luann, as do many of others of you who have overcome that kind of horrific abuse as a child. And that's why. What did Jesus say about the children, and if you abuse the child?
Better millstone about your neck?
Yeah, he was really raging on that. So, believe me, those who have suffered for it. Because they are the innocent. This is why we have to continually, in our watches and prayers, we pray for our children and our youth.
I think this is why what Tom was saying about the bosses or the people governing needing to have mutual respect, because that would be like the parent and the child. And it makes me think about so many of these Bible studies and how often either the ruler or the people that are falling down, but rather than the one uplifting the other, they seem to get pulled into that downward spiral, which is what we need to do here, which we are doing in Plainfield, but which our country needs to do is to uplift everybody so that our leaders are uplifted rather than going in the opposite direction.
Thank you very much.
It's easy to complain, but who's making a positive step to make a positive contribution to the good?
I always held that with people who would criticize Mrs. Evans, because at times she could be rather ruthless, but I would say, well, what have you done for the cause of science? What have you done? You walk a mile in her shoes, and then maybe I'll talk to you about this. Seriously, because often the ones who are doing the most are getting the most rocks thrown at them. So, and it's always those who are sitting on the sidelines just criticizing. I have no patience for that. You get in there, you do it. If you think things need to be better, get in there and do it. If you think there should be more instantaneous healings, you perform those instantaneous healings. Then maybe I'll listen to your complaints. Okay? You try what you were criticizing. You do it.
I heard before that
think,
pioneers are the ones that hit the arrow.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
When my mother went through the war, she only, and my father was in the war, so she was alone. There were 2 kids and a sick grandmother and a sick mother. And she took us to the bunker, and she had to go home in darkness, and she had no sense of orientation at all. She had to go in darkness because everybody had their blinds down because so that the airplanes couldn't see you. And she went home, and we were almost full, the bunker. But she was such a loving, she was an angel. She always felt like she had to make up to us because we went through the war. And she was just too good because she spoiled me. Later on.
Oh, you're talking about Nazi Germany?
Yes.
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 Well, and that sometimes happens, too.
Well,
So-
sometimes adversity brings out the best in people.
Well, and then we have this other side of, we're talking about perhaps abusive parents, but then there are those who are good parents, seemingly good parents, or fairly good parents. And you have to be careful, again, you don't slip into having a human sense of your relationship with them, which is, can be, even under, quote, good circumstances, where they expect things of you, they want to control you, they're always telling you what you should do, even if you think it's right, like you come to church and you call a practitioner and you do this and you do that. That's not seeing them as what?
Or directed.
Yes, as God directed. You're saying they don't have the mind of Christ. You do, but they don't. And they will resist that. And it comes in other ways, too. And I'm giving that example, but, they can just think that, well, they want you to be a lawyer, or they want this for you, or they want that for you. And again, you resist it because that's not up to anyone. That's up to you, and as a child of God, that you figure those things out on your own. You don't have parents telling you. And when they do, it's right that you do resist it. The human mind. And we'll get to this in the next question, but this human sense of parenthood, even when it seems to be good, is actually very bad, because we know that human good is just as bad as human bad. We call this too smother love. It doesn't have to be a mother, it can be a father.
Okay, so on the next question, from our lesson, so would someone like to volunteer to summarize Luke 2? Just a quick summary.
Well, when Jesus was 12 years old, he went with his parents to the Passover feast. And when the festivities were gone, they all left together, except they didn't realize that Jesus had been stayed behind. He communed with the doctors and the people in the temple, asking questions and answering questions about God as revealed in the Scriptures. And those that were very experienced were amazed about how intelligent this young boy was in the things of God.
What did his mother say?
When his mother and father came, they were upset with him. He wasn't following them. His response,
Don't you know that I must be about my Father's business?
Yeah.
set the tone for his whole life there.
They didn't understand it, but his mother had the good sense to keep these sayings in her heart.
Thank you. So here we see this, well, I mean, it's very, very natural, a human sense of the parents being concerned about their child. It seems very, very natural. But Jesus was highly spiritual, and because he was highly spiritual, what did it do to him?
Well, he was just free of any human sense of anything. He was just...
And he was. So he resisted it.
Yes, because he was just about his father's business. I mean, he was already in the mind of the Christ.
We should see our children having that mind of Christ and respect that in them. Not when they're naughty and disobedient, but when we see God working in them. And if we try to hold or control that, there's trouble. That's human.
Well, and who in the Bible instructs us to call no man your father upon the earth?
Jesus.
Yeah. So not only did he refer to God as his father, but he told us that God is our Father.
And when the disciples said, your mother and your family are waiting for you out here, he said, who are my family? Who is my father? Who's my mother? Who is my brother? It's the ones who do the will of God.
Yes. He said it, and he lived it. And as Christian scientists, we take that on ourselves. And it's not cruel. I don't think anyone loved their mother as much as Mrs. Eddy did. Her mother had passed on, but she had very strong family ties. She knew as she grew in her science with her brothers and sisters that she had to remove herself to those who objected to what she was doing.
And it was even hard for her when her sister, whose daughter she had healed, totally turned against. It was hard for her, but of course she had to let go.
She did. Thank you. That's one of the examples.
And what's amazing is that even though at 12 Jesus probably had a higher sense of God than his parents, he still, out of respect for them, went with them and stayed with them until he was of age to go out and preach.
Thank you, Mike. That's absolutely right. He was in obedience to the law of honoring your father and mother. And when he was on the cross, what were some of his last words?
Forgive them, for they know not what they do.
And he told his disciple to take care of my mother.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thought about his mother, his human mother, who wanted her cared for.
They just had the right priorities. He didn't let go of any priorities.
He didn't. And actually, when you take this more divine interpretation of this commandment, you will love your human parents even more, but in a right way.
And in the right order. God first.
God first.
That's 100% correct, because that's the only thing that has made me accepting into the situation with my father, because through recognizing that order to the degree I've been able to has definitely made that more forgiving nature possible for me.
And, just spending a lot of time with a person doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's always quality time. And I know when we had family members who were, it's one thing if they accept what you're doing and it's not a big fight, but if they're opposing what you're doing, then things change. If they're opposing what you're doing, you'll find you'll have to distance yourself, because you'll find when you're with them, it's just hell. You're just growing. And so if it's hell when you're with them, you can do more for them not being with them and knowing the truth about them. If I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. I mean, Gary and Bruce had a situation with their mother where they didn't have contact with her for quite some time because she was opposing what they were doing.
She eventually came around and saw the light. We were very grateful when she did.
And then we had communication with her again. It was Wonderful.
But when there's people in your life opposing what you're doing, God will not allow you to waste your time.
Now, you read the story, the allegory, it says that He will remove the obstacles in your path. Because it's right, you be free to grow. And the point is, God is your father, mother, God, and God is also your parents, father, mother, God, and your children's father, mother, God. It must be understood and practiced in science. I have some things, I'll probably read it tomorrow at the round table about this. It has to be. You cannot fool around with this principle. You cannot say you're a Christian Scientist and then want to own your children and boss them and possess them, or also be prideful of them, how wonderful they are. Someone once talked to Mrs. Evans or Mrs. Eddy saying, you know, I have a Christian Science baby. I couldn't find this, but I know I've read it and it's made an impression on me. And she said, what? What is that? No such thing. That's just pride. Keep your mouth shut.
Well, when we were talking about the Fifth Commandment, we were talking about respect, and that was quite interesting when talks about Jesus when He was sitting in the midst of the doctors, and says here, both hearing them. And I thought that was fascinating because you would think of Jesus as knowing something that other people don't know, and you know, trying to correct people's thinking or whatever, you know. But you know, when someone is hearing someone, you know, they're paying attention to the person, trying to understand what they're saying, which is obviously showing respect for the person, you know.
Well, also, he learned the scriptures at an early age. And this is how he did it, sitting in the temple in the midst of the doctors, hearing them and asking them questions.
And that's why it's so important, if any of you have children or as a teacher or nieces, nephews, or whatever, the greatest thing you can do is teach them Scripture, teach them about God. They already naturally know. They're so close to God in the first place. And they absorb it like sponges. It makes such sense to them. But you're also feeding their spiritual nature. And if you do that, I mean, the Bible says you train a child in the way he should go, and he'll stay on it. Makes it easier to do it early on than have to do it later. But nothing's impossible. If you have to do it later, later is better than never.
So would someone like to volunteer to summarize Luke 7?
Well, that's the story that we started from Nain, when Jesus was in that town, and he saw a funeral procession, I guess is what it would be called. And he went up to the woman and the mother and said, "Weep not," and then raised her son from the dead.
Thank you. That was in last week's lesson, too, so it's an important point, evidently.
Yeah, this week added a little more from verse 16, though. So I think last week only went to, and there came a fear on all, and they glorified God. But this week adds, then they said that a great prophet has risen up among us, and that God hath visited his people. So that was interesting that it added to last week.
I noticed that.
Sorry, Florence.
No, I was just going to say I read that this was Jesus' first raising of anybody from the dead. So
Thank you.
I didn't realize that.
Gardy?
Oh, I noticed that it was his first healing someone from the dead, and there were two more, so there are three. And then when his parents were searching for him, it took 3 days. So we've got the threes, and it goes with life, truth, and love.
And I just thought that was interesting.
Well, here he was being cognizant of Jewish law, too, wasn't he? Here was a woman who was a widow, and her only son had just died. It would have left her in a horrible, horrible situation.
And he told her not to weep. He had great compassion on her. Weep not.
And also touching the bier. You know, I guess there was a custom, people didn't do that, so that was something too.
Yeah, I think that was considered unclean.
Right.
You love to break those kind of human laws. Well, again, here is great compassion for the mother-son relationship. Great compassion. We don't love less, we love more. That's very, very important in any of this. To love more. I felt when we did stop seeing Mary versus mother for a while, it was because we loved more, not less. Some of these stances are very hard to take. It takes more love sometimes to do this than to just go along with the flow of things, human sense of things. So make sure it's always you feel more love in your heart, not less. And what blesses one blesses all. If your thought is rising, just as Jesus, as a 12-year-old, was rising, he blessed his parents much more by taking that stand than if he let them have a human concept of them, human worrying. Children are very sensitive to parents worrying about them. So stop it.
Well, this is a beautiful conclusion to this story, too. It says that God had visited his people, that the people had acknowledged it, and that the people were saying it. And they also notice that it says that didn't say that God visited us, but God had visited his people. So they acknowledged that they all belong to God. A tremendous blessing this story concluded with.
Thank you. As I said, you think of all the time Jesus referred to God as Father. It was just as natural as could be. I don't know, we could investigate how many times he says God, but I know he says Father almost all the time. His Father. In very sweet, endearing terms. This was his Father. Do you have that relationship with your Heavenly Father? All of us should, and if we don't, we should get where we do. It's a basic premise of the science.
It doesn't get any better than that.
No, it doesn't. And not just Father, but Father, Mother. So no one is without that sense of God. Father, Mother, God. If anyone thinks you've had a parents that weren't what they should be, well, you can know that you've always had the right sense of parenthood in God. And if you ever felt you were a crummy mother or father, well, you can know your children always have had it too. It's the trump card. It overrules all the human beliefs of life in matter. You know, that Carthens wrote on the forum, I kind of smiled over it about not Mother's Day, it's Matter Day. Matter Day, because, and as I wrote back, that Mrs. Evans thought that Mother's Day was the worst of all the holidays. You're born into matter, you're going to die out of it, and, you know, I'm your mother, and you owe me, you owe me whatever.
Your life.
Yeah, your life. And that, where's God, as Florence so well said, and that was something the Evanses always would say, where is God in all of that? Where is God in all of that? So remember this tomorrow on Mother's Day. You see.
I don't celebrate Mother's Day.
Well, that's good. No one really should here. Not really. I mean,
My son insists on it, and I can't stand Mother's Day.
Well, I mean, it's not as though it's a holiday.
No, it's a made-up
It's
thing.
a made-up thing.
I know. It was a commercial makeup. I remember when they made it.
Right.
My parents had no use for it. My mother and father said, they've just made this up.
Right, all the cards and flowers and restaurants.
Becomes competitive and emotional and
Right.
Leaves a lot of people out.
Yes, it does.
Yep.
Yes, it does. If you didn't get that card or something, you could cry all day.
And how sad, because that concept is now spreading. Growing up, we never had that, and now I hear people at home talking about Mother's Day. I said, wow.
I wondered about that. I wondered if other countries had it.
We never had that. Not when I was growing up.
Well, and
When I was growing up, they made it up.
yeah, it is. You're right. It's a Hallmark holiday.
Without money. They have Grandparents' Day now, too.
Oh yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, yeah.
They have Secretary's Day. They have every day. So, but
Take your kid to work day.
yes, Boss's Day.
I remember growing up, we had children, and it was to honor the children. We did a special program and everything.
Well, it's a very human sense of things. That doesn't mean, though, if you have an earthly mother and you should be honoring her every day if you love her and if she's been good and kind. We're not knocking that at all. Christ Jesus did not, as you see, on the cross. No, he loved his earthly mother, father too, sure. He loved everyone as God's child, but he refused the domination, the control, all the human sense of it. He divorced it from the human, made it into something divine.
As already was said, he took care of his mother on the cross. When he said to John, this is your mother, and he took care of them, and it was just a beautiful thing to do.
Absolutely. But everyone is different. God guides you in this path. And so just always remember, let love with a capital L rule. Remember who is your father, mother. It's the father, mother of us all. And you can't go wrong, whatever stance you have to take.
How we doing, Tom?
Been fine. So I think a lot of what we're doing relates to, what we've been discussing relates to the last two questions. So I don't know if we want to just end where we are now, or if you want to pick up the questions later, or if someone has any comments on the last two questions.
Yeah, I think we can touch on them briefly, if that's all right.
Okay. So what does it mean to be in Christ?
It means to have the mind of Christ, to be a healer, to be loving, and to all the Christ attributes that we need to have too.
Live as he taught.
That means healing. That's the world just hasn't got it yet, but it will.
How about it means to see God as your Father, as Jesus did. To love your neighbor as yourself, as Jesus did.
Definitely following his precepts and having that mind of Christ. Having that mind. And if you have that mind, these things come naturally to you. You'll see it clearly. It's always seeing the false sense of things, belief, and then seeing the true, divine sense of it. laws of God.
To be obedient to the mind that made you.
Yes. Being in Christ. You know, as we've talked about many times, Mrs. Eddy talks about being in science. To me, that's being in the right mind of Christ. And if you are, you're not in that Adam dream. You're not. And then ambassador for Christ?
Yeah. So what does it mean to be an ambassador for Christ?
Well,
Just live the science, don't talk it.
thank you.
Thank you.
To stand up for someone that, to stand up for the truth and to stand up for all that Christ stood up for.
Absolutely. Come out from the material world and be separate at times.
Matthew, Jesus said, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven." So we demonstrate that Christ, so that everyone will glorify God.
Yes. The definition of ambassador, or respected official acting as a representative. Some people, what is that statement? Some people, you're the only God person might ever meet. That's not the right quote, but it's the idea that you bring that person.
Your life may be the only sermon
Oh, that's
person ever hears.
Thank you.
That's beautiful.
And as Jeremy has said, when you stand, either you stand for something or you fall for everything.
Yeah.
Stand for something or you fall. Yes, we have to stand, and we have to be that example. And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's not the accepted thing to do. People will say, what's with this? But you have to come out from the material world and be separate. Be an ambassador. And eventually, they might not like you for it, but as Mrs. Eddy says, they will respect you for it. Anyone else?
Well, thank you, Tom and
Thank
Linda.
you so much, Tom. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom. Thank you, Tom.
Good session.
We'll continue.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Thank you.